Welcome to another edition of the Eye on Life podcast. It is go time on another show, and as we're taping the show today, and when it drops, I don't know how the weather will be. It's too early, Don. It's too early for snow here in the Northeast, but yet here it is. Nothing terrible yet, and I want to welcome you to the show, Don. I know we have known each other for many years, and at the for true transparency, which is what we're all about on the show, Don is actually the brains and the creativity behind the video each week. So you have him to blame. Everyone who's watching, you have Don to blame for having to look at me on a weekly basis.
Right.
And I have to say, Don, you have one of the best names. We've talked about this. Whenever I say that my video guy, his name is Don Napoleon, nobody believes me.
Right.
Because it's a very majestic name.
I thank my parents.
Well, your parents did a great job with that. Yep. So I want to thank you for joining the show. I want a couple things before we get into our conversation today. I want to thank as usual, our sponsor, Must NY, www.mustny.com. COVID masks. I know, Don, you hear this every week, and it's really important. And actually, again, we talk about open and honesty on the show. I never like to sound preachy. It's important that I don't sound preachy. Today we might sound a little preachy, but we're going to try to avoid that as much as we can. But the COVID has finally hit close to home for me. My dad was actually diagnosed with COVID. He's asymptomatic. He's doing well. I think that he actually likes nobody bothering him anyway. So he's completely secluded in his bedroom. He and my mom are in the house together, and again, they both might be enjoying the vacation from each other just slightly, but they do communicate. He's getting like room service. It's like at the hotel, you eat the food and you leave it outside the door.
Good life, the good life.
That's what he's getting. So, but it was so, Don, it was so odd. We've known each other for almost 20 years now. Mm-hmm. He called me up the other night and said he had COVID, and it's just. So many people have it, and it's not rare anymore. But my dad said to me, he's like, I can't believe I am now a statistic. And right. It was just sort of surreal and shocking to hear it, even though he's asymptomatic and he seems to be okay for the moment. But it was freaky. So I guess my only preachy thing to say is please wear the masks. It can't, as we've said in the past, it cannot hurt. There's some people that question how much it helps, but it absolutely cannot hurt. And if you're going to wear a mask and do it on behalf of Must NY and people like my dad who are older and really need to be protected. And you know what, Don? The funny thing, again, it's not funny. The ironic thing about my dad, he barely ever goes. He's gone out like twice since this whole thing started.
I know. That's everybody's thing right now. They go nowhere and then they get it.
You go nowhere and you get it. So if you could. Purchase the COVID masks, and if you already have them, wear them. But mustny.com, they're great. They're breathable. You can't suffocate, so that's not. As I said, you can actually muffle people that you don't want to hear, Don. So if there's somebody like me that there are people that are friends with me that want me to wear the mask so they don't have to hear me talk as much. In fact, I actually think that's why Must NY actually created the business, because my friend Chris knows. He was on the show last time. He knows that I don't shut up. Right. The other thing that's been on my mind a little bit lately, I want to ask you this question, Don. Mm-hmm. I'm finding that, and I don't know if it's because we've been cooped up for the past 6 to 8 months or whatever, but I'm finding that my memory is not as good as it used to be, and it's I don't think it's an age thing. Mm-hmm. No, when like old people say, "Oh, it's my memory, I'm getting old." Right. I know there are people my age that are forgetting things. There are people that are in their 20s that I know that are forgetting things. But here's the weird thing, Don. I want to ask you how this works for you as far as your memory goes. I can't necessarily remember something that somebody said to me like a day ago or 2 days ago, but I can remember specific things about my high school. We just had my high school podcast, the high school reunion, right?
Yeah.
I can remember specific instances about the smell of a hallway while my friend was doing something goofy or.
Yeah.
So, do you have that issue? Are you forgetting things, or is it me? Do I need to be concerned about my memory?
No, you're not. And I started to trip out the other day about that because, of course, right now since we're home and we've been home for almost 6+ months, all we're doing is telling stories, right? So every story from the past, we're bringing it up. but like I don't know songs, and I don't know a lot of short-term memories, what you're talking about.
Right.
But no, I think it's because we're so used to picking up, going here, doing that. So our brains are working overtime, right? On a regular basis. But like, because now since we're in the home, we're doing limited things, right?
Right.
So it's
Right.
like the brain is like, oh, it's not that much activity for it to do. And to answer your question, yeah, the couple of times I had to ask my wife, like, I'm okay, right? Like I've been functioning, all right, walking around the house, right? She's like, yeah. I was like, all right, because it just seems like short-term things are like I'm forgetting them. I got to ask you again.
And it's, yeah, right, exactly. And it's weird because we've all had that instance where you get up to go get something from the kitchen or from another room
Yeah.
and you don't remember. But I'm not even talking about that. That hasn't even happened. I'm talking about conversations that I've had with people. And even I think I've actually even repeated myself a few times on this show. And I wasn't sure if I should be concerned with. I mean, trust me, there are many things about myself that concern me and those around me.
It's just the pandemic. We're cooped up too long.
Okay, so I shouldn't be worried. You're telling me I'm okay.
Don't be worried. Don't be worried.
And when I say I'm okay, I put that in quotes because okay is all relative.
Yeah.
So as I said, you're listening to the Eye on Life podcast today. We have a very special guest, Don Napoleon. I do also want to recognize some new listeners and viewers that we have. Saw some representation from Atlanta. So that's cool. We're getting down to the South. We've had a bunch in Florida. So the ATL is representing. They still call it Hotlanta. I don't know if they still call it Hotlanta, but Atlanta is representing.
They just abbreviated to ATL.
ATL. So Atlanta, we have some people in Atlanta that are listening, and then Little Elm, Texas is another one that I saw that popped up. I believe that is in the Dallas Metroplex. So I appreciate the people in the Dallas Metro. In fact, there's some listeners in Dallas too. So we're getting we're expanding the listenership, the viewership. We haven't scared people away too badly. So Don, I don't want you to scare anybody away today.
Got it.
If we start losing viewership, I'll know that it's the trend. I'll know it's on you, not me, because I'm kidding. It's completely me. We know that.
I know.
So Don and I have been, as I've mentioned now, we have been friends / business partners since I lived down in DC many years ago. It's at least 17 years. It's closer to 20, I think.
It's close. Yeah, it's been a while.
And let me first just give you a kudos. Anybody who remains friendly or partners with me for that long, obviously has some form of illness. But I really appreciate everything that you've done professionally and personally with and for me. And as I mentioned, Don does the video work, and Don and I have had some really interesting conversations because, as you can, if you're watching this, you can see that Don and I look a little different. And I don't mean that he's more handsome. I mean, he is more handsome than I am.
I'm okay.
But Don and I look a little different, and so we've had some conversations about society and race. And if you're not listening, I happen to be Caucasian and Don happens to be African American, and that's never had any impact on our relationship at all. Nor would it. It just is what it is, right? And so we're going to talk about a few things today that might be a little bit sensitive, but it's that time where, we try to have some fun on the show. We will have some fun. We don't want to we don't want to make this too heavy. But there are some perspectives that I think are important that we discuss. And as everyone, if this is the first time you're watching this show or the 12th time you're watching the show, this is the kind of conversation that Don and I would go and sit and have a drink at a bar, which I think we've done before, and just kind of have the conversation about it. So there's going to be some things that I'm educated on today, I'm sure. Yeah. And hopefully maybe there could be it can go both ways, right? So as I said, we look different. We come from different backgrounds. And the other thing I want to just say, Don, and I will shut up and let you talk, I promise. The perspective that you're getting today from Don, right? I want to be very clear. The caveat here is that, and I don't want to put any added pressure on you, so I'm trying to take it off a little bit, Don. You're not speaking for all of society. Mm-hmm. You're not speaking for all of Black people. Right. I'm not speaking for the whole Caucasian, okay? This is a conversation between two people who know each other very well. And that's why we're doing the show. Exactly. So I'm from upstate New York and grew up in the Albany area, as most people know after listening to the last week's show. And didn't grow up with a lot of diversity, but it wasn't like Bumpkinville. I had seen things besides, cows before. It wasn't farmland. But I want to hear about your background, Don, and because we come from different places and yet we've bonded over the years.
Yeah.
to keep in touch. So just tell our audience a little bit about your background, where you came from, and kind of how you got to where you are today at this moment.
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Brian. And also thanks for having me on the show. Like I said, I appreciate our friendship over the years. We've never had a jump about anything out of the ordinary. Like we've always just been straight shooters and just great friends. Right. So about me, my family is Haitian. Where both my parents are Haitian born, and they moved to New York. So I was actually born in upstate New York, Nyack, New York to be exact. They raised us with Haitian values. We got beatings, like typical young kids. We got all the great Haitian cookings and all the great stuff. Parents migrated over to Jersey for a little while. And we were raised in the Catholic faith. We were raised Catholic. We had a pretty diverse neighborhood. And we were just raised with just the values of just treating all people commonly well, basically. We grew up in a very good household with no discrimination, just everyone was equal. We never looked at color. My parents wanted everyone to have a good education. We all went to high school, Catholic high school. And then when it was time to go to college, that's when me and my brothers, I have 4 brothers. That's when we all dispersed. I ended up going to school in West Virginia, which was a culture shock for me. And then the second year I was out there playing football. I had a football scholarship there. And in the second year, I ended up transferring to an HBCU. And that's actually where I got a lot of my foundation of growing up to be a young man. You come from New York and then you go to Jersey and then you have the Haitian values behind you, but you really don't start developing and growing up and becoming a young man until you get to college, basically. So I went to school in Virginia State University, and ended up graduating from there, graduated with a psychology degree, interesting, and a minor in communications. And after that is when I started pursuing my career. I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do. I took a dive into media and communications and marketing and kind of moved myself around. I went from NBC News Channel 12. I worked in Richmond for a little bit, and then I finally moved to DC. Finally came to Washington, D.C., and then I started working in video production. And that's actually where my career launched. As a video production professional, I had worked in news, I had worked in the film business, but then when I worked in video production, my first producing job was with the mayor's office of cable television. And actually that's where we met. When I took that job, and you probably don't know this, I had never produced my own show, ever. And
I don't remember you telling me that when we signed you up for that contract, but
no, I came on as a professional, and I utilized a lot of the skill sets that I had prior to then, and then a lot of the producers there were very helpful. So that was my first show, DC Chamber Chat, covering business economic development in the city, right? And that's actually where we met. And from there, I actually produced that show for a couple of years, and actually that's when I started going off on my own. I launched my company, Napoleon Complex Project, and I had worked a couple of different production companies prior to that. But when I launched my company, probably 2007, between there and 2010 is when I started getting my background as a storyteller. And today I work as a video journalist. So most of my peers still look at me as Don, the storyteller. I produce video projects for government, entertainment, sports, and I cover and do a lot of documentation of real things that are happening in society. So of course I live in the nation's capital, so there's a lot of things that take place. So my company's always on the pulse. We're always getting contacted to cover marches, protests, just different things, not protests per se, but just things that are happening around the Capitol or just politics in general. That's probably about 40% of our work, but we're storytellers, and that's what I do today. And not to leave out at all, I got married while I was here. I met my wife in 2006. We have 2 kids. I have a young man, and I have a daughter, and I'm happily living in Maryland. That's my background.
Well, that's a great background. And, you mentioned being in Maryland and in the, around the nation's capital and doing what you do, obviously. I mean, what better place to be than Washington, D.C., right? Telling stories. There's a lot going on. So right now, Washington, and as someone who lived in D.C. for a while, I am very well aware of the diverse makeup of the city.
Yeah.
And the people that call it home, right? So as you know, you just mentioned your journey throughout, your career. You've obviously had a successful career. You've made it to a certain point now. There's still a long ways for you to go, because I know you have a huge runway with the work that you do. But along the way, have you experienced, there's always those talks where people say, well, if you're a minority, you start, well behind someone that might not be a minority. It sounds like maybe you spent some time in some areas that were diverse, but then also some areas that might not have been as diverse.
Mhm.
Was there anything along the way as a Black man that sort of set you back a little bit, where you had to really persevere to get to where you are right now?
Yeah, what's interesting? My first job in television was in Richmond, and I was working at NBC News there, and it was diverse working there. I think I didn't start to run into anything interesting until I got to New York. And I went to New York. I was working at a magazine there in marketing. And I started from the ground up, but everyone seemed pretty fair. Like it didn't seem that that there was any issues with that. But a funny incident happened, an interesting story. I was I was on the phone a lot with a lot of executives, so I was going to get an executive one. So like you said about my whole name, I was like, okay, so I'll be down in the lobby to pick you up. So I come down in the lobby. They literally walk right past me, right? So I knew who, expecting who they were, but they walk right past me, and I'm like, have my hand halfway out. But what came up from that, and I talked to some sales guys later on, it was just that they didn't expect me to be Black, right? And of course, it wasn't a kind of a big discussion, but it just kind of just threw me for a loop that that occurred. You know what I'm saying? And that's a small incident. But what was the question again? You said
well, just as far as throughout your career, and
yeah.
you've been to a lot, a bunch of different places.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, we talk about, I'm Jewish, right? But people don't necessarily know that I'm Jewish outwardly, right?
Yeah,
Although I've had people say you don't look Jewish, which we'll get into that whole stereotype thing, either this show or next. By the way, just so everyone knows, this is part one. This is way too long of a conversation to only have Don on for one part. But so were there obstacles or challenges that maybe you might have experienced along the way that maybe myself may not have, simply just based on the way you look and the way I look?
Yeah, I think because I worked in video production and I heard other stories with other people. But I think because I worked in video production and I was so persistent that maybe I didn't notice it. When I used to work in film, the only questions I had when I worked in film, like I worked under one of the best production managers ever in this DC area. We worked on films like State of Play, Night at the Museum, Transformers, all these big movies were coming here. This was years ago. But I used to always ask myself, why am I the only Black guy? Like, why is that? And me and someone else. But I was always just kind of real persistent. I almost had a job with Ridley Scott. If everybody knows who Ridley Scott is, I was the fourth in line to be his assistant years ago. Who knows where my life would be then? So I look at that saying, wow, that was an opportunity that was presenting itself. For me, I think it's always been that, I worked hard, but I did run into certain obstacles that came up, but I just kept persisting and busting right through them. Like I didn't look at them saying, because it wasn't like I was in corporate America where I could see where things wouldn't happen. Like I have friends that I did refer them to jobs, and I'm not going to mention the places, very great major networks where they would see other people that was not the same color as them move around quicker. So that occurred. I think with me, like I said, I was just too persistent. And if I can remember, I'll probably mention it again in the conversation. I just knew how to kind of navigate really well. Even though I would see obstacles that present themselves, I just knew how to navigate around them.
That's interesting. It sounds like you almost had like the tunnel vision.
Yeah.
That even if there was something that maybe presented an obstacle to you, you just sort of you didn't really absorb necessarily why it was happening, but you came up with the solution versus the problem.
Pretty much.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like, which is great. And I guess my question, so, and we've talked about this on the show a little bit too. You're listening to the Eye on Life podcast. We're with Don Napoleon, a longtime friend of mine. We're talking about kind of race and society. Not kind of, we are talking about race and society. And I want to ask you this question because it seems like today, in today's society, right, that it's very, very easy to get offended by anything.
Right.
And it's being offended is very subjective, right? You know, what offends me may not offend someone else, and vice versa.
Mhm.
But it does seem like there are a lot of times, and I'm not narrowing this to any particular race or color or anything, that people just get offended, and it's like they're choosing to be offended.
Right.
And I'm asking you, and I'd like to find out what's, and again, there's no right or wrong answer as far as what's legitimate. If it offends someone, then it offended them, and we should be sensitive to that. But I guess my question is, when that guy walked by you, was that offensive to you? Were you offended by that, or did it not really phase you? And even today, I guess my question would be to you: what is something that offends you,
Yeah.
versus something that maybe some people maybe overreact to? And I know that's a judgment, but
Yeah.
what do
No,
you
I
think?
think for me, I started to realize that, you grow up not knowing, you grow up with your parents saying, don't look at color, right? I had friends from all different backgrounds when we grew up in school. So we were taught not to judge people, right? But then you start getting older and you get your first job. And when that occurred, I started to notice like there is a color barrier. Like there is something that's apparent. Like I'll give you an example. Like one of my jobs in DC, we went out on a company dinner, and for some reason I was like, oh, it's the black guy. I don't know why. And so I was like, all right, so I'm leaving early. So I said, all right, I'm gonna go outside. This is DC. This is probably like mid 2000s. I said, I'm gonna go to catch a cab. So I couldn't get a cab. Like literally could not get a cab. Right. So of course at that point I am being offended. Right. So I come back in there and they're like, yo, Don, what are you doing? Like you left like 15, 20 minutes ago. So I was like, listen, I don't want to explain it. I'm tired. It's late. I don't want to explain my story. I don't want to explain how offended I am. If you could just come outside and help me get a cab. So one of the guys come out. Of course, he's a Caucasian, of course, and good friend at my job. Waves his hand. Cab stops over quick. He's like, look, my buddy needs to get home. So we had a conversation about it again when I got to work. But things like that occurred do offend me, and even with all the studios and different jobs that I have been in, it always has been, interestingly, the walk by. Like, so Don will be out to get you, or Don is, and I don't know if they know if I'm black or white or whatever the situation is. It's always the walk. They walk by Don. It's like, hey, I'm Don. And I never would understand, like, what's the big deal? There's a black guy that work in production. So, it's okay if I just never really understood it. So
The cab thing is interesting, Don, because
yeah.
well, first off, I mean, DC is a very diverse, as we said, very diverse city.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But cab drivers in DC are fairly diverse too. So that's odd that they would have maybe decided not to pick you up based on how you look, considering they're probably, maybe they're born here, but maybe have roots in a different place. That's very odd.
Let me go deeper into that. And this is not one time. This is several times.
Okay.
So, and I'm going to go deeper to help you understand that and people to understand why that even occurred. Another time, this is my other buddy. He's a developer here, does really well for himself. We're hanging out. It's late at night. This is a funny story because we couldn't find our car. And this is how much fun we had, right? We're out drinking. So we're like, all right, let's just catch a cab home. It took us about an hour in Adams Morgan to find a cab. So we were like, okay, we have to get home. And at that time, we were living in Southeast across the river. We ended up waving our cash on the main street. Cab guy pulls over. We didn't tell him where we lived. We got in the car and we just handed him $40. Where we were going was probably only about $20. We were like, keep it. We told him where we were going. And then he was like, and we said to him, we said, nobody would pull over. We know why. And then the ones that did pull over when we said we're going to Southeast, they didn't want to go because they said they got robbed or different situations happened. And you have two dorks in dress shirts coming from work and dress pants,
right?
But it wasn't the first time. Like it happens a lot. And, that was like going deeper in this area in the district, Maryland, Virginia area, and one of the cab drivers told us, he said, it has happened. They are afraid to go into certain parts of the city. And I get it, which is kind of sad for other people, like myself, and other working class people that are just trying to get home.
So you have, not that I need to tell you, that would be something that would be offensive, I think, to most people.
Yep.
That's not really there's no real threshold there. That is offensive, especially since you know the reason why.
Yeah.
And it's always the thing that I always find interesting about people, right? And their views and, sometimes the ignorance is that, so if you're black, people know you're black. I mean, usually, right? I mean, sometimes if there's lighter skin or whatnot, but it's funny, like for me, like people don't know that I'm Jewish unless I'm having a conversation with them. So are people ever saying something in front of you offensive? And then they're like, oh my God, I forgot there's a black guy with us, or I shouldn't be saying that, because there it is. Like I had, and I won't mention the company or the person, but I was working at a job several years ago, and we were talking about negotiating a contract for an outside vendor. And the person used the term, and you may have heard this before, let's Jew them down. I don't know if you've heard that before, but the stereotype of Jewish people not, being thrifty or cheap, right? Yeah. And she didn't know that I was Jewish. And I said, what did you just say? And she looked at me. I said, you do know that I'm Jewish, right? And so that I was offended by that. I really didn't make a big issue. I didn't go to HR. Maybe I should have. Yeah. But do you find? I think people just say stupid things sometimes because they don't know how to handle the situation. She obviously did not know that I was Jewish. Yeah. But do people ever say things in front of you and they obviously know that you're black, but they just forgot their filter just left them for a few minutes or something like that? Has that ever happened where you have to kind of call someone out and say, hey, that's you don't say that in front of me?
The common terminology, which is even in my community, I'm 47 years old, and you hear it in rap music, and you hear it in everyday people's conversations, the term NIGGA, right?
Sure.
So, I think at my age, at this point now, I'm a little older where it's not part of your conversation and your vocabulary. But it has happened in the past at a younger age where somebody that wasn't African American would either be showing you a lyric to a song or having a conversation with you, and then it just slips out. Usually they catch themselves, or if they don't catch themselves, or they're they're saying a full sentence and the term NIGGA comes out. Most of the time, black people, or most of the time, like myself, when it has happened, I'm going to pause for a second. I'm like, dude, you're too comfortable.
Yeah, right.
And he's like, what did I say? And I was like, you said it. So, but let me also go deeper into that too. The person that I was talking about, which has happened several times, not with just them, with other people, they grew up different, kind of diverse in the cool neighborhood. It was different. So what we say when I say we African Americans, they say, yeah, I guess people just get comfortable with saying that term, right? But it is offensive, right? Because sometimes someone may get too comfortable with it, and then they'll use it in a term where it goes a little bit deeper than the core, So it has occurred. It does occur when I was younger, and you have to stop people and just say, hey man, you just really got to watch what you're saying.
But in that situation when you're saying the person's too comfortable, was that a white person saying it?
Yeah.
Or
yeah.
It was.
Yeah. So they're explaining a sentence, and it was like, yeah, and that NGGA was saying, but it's
right.
It's stupid because we say it in rap songs, or we say it in conversations when we're younger. I don't use the term anymore. I even educate my kids not to use the term. So when someone else says it, it's like, oh, all of a sudden it becomes offensive. But then it becomes offensive if somebody says, well, that NIGGA shouldn't have, and it's like, oh man, dude, we're going so outside the spectrum right now. And sometimes you just got to call people out on it, like you said, Jew it down. That's not cool.
Right.
Right. So yeah,
there's an opportunity there to educate people, because I think there's a large part of the population that they are malicious, and they are racist, whatever your definition of that is, right? And they just are. They're hateful people. But I think there are also some people, and I guess that's the difference between ignorance and hate, although there's obviously overlap there. But there are some people that they're not hateful people.
Yeah.
They're just ignorant. They don't understand. They're like, well, if I'm using it in a song, it's okay. No.
Yeah.
If I'm talking to my black friend, it's okay. No.
Yeah.
And so I think that some people just don't know. They just don't have the common sense, and it's I almost feel bad for them.
Yeah.
you know, that they don't have that wherewithal. Let me ask you this question.
Mhm.
Are you, when you say, whoa, you know, you're feeling too comfortable saying that, would you have that same response to a black friend who said it as well? Because you said it's not part of your vocabulary.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you're not using that word.
Yeah.
If a white person says it, obviously there's a connotation and there's a comfort level that should not be there necessarily for that person.
Yeah.
If a
Yeah.
black friend of yours says it, are you saying to them, whoa, I'm not reusing that, or are you kind of letting that go? And how does that work? I mean, is that, again, that's
It's interesting, and I'll tell you this: when I was younger, of course, there's no filter for it. So,
right.
right, you know, and as you get older, it starts to change. But when you're younger, it's like this, you know, you're not educated enough when you're younger to think that maybe that's not cool. And you start saying it around other people, then you got to stop them and say, hey, why did you say that? As an older person, like I said, now I'm 47. And if I am talking to a younger person, you know what I'm saying? If I go back to my alma mater, college, or talk to a younger guy or frat brother or whomever, I have stopped them. Like, I ain't gonna lie, I'm not gonna lie to you. It's like, hey, dude, man, listen, you know, I love having a conversation with you, but you know, just, you know, I'm trying to keep my vibrations high. So, you know, you said NIGJ about 6 times, but I want to educate you to just help you to be a better person too. Because I don't want you to be in a situation where you're talking to other people or people of other descent, and then you becomes an issue with you. Oh, I didn't think about it that way. So we're at a point now, when I say we, older guys that are mentors, and you know, we're at a point where we have to try to educate the younger guys so they can have better conversations. So yeah, so it's different now. Like I said, I'm not gonna say I didn't say that when I was younger. It's what I'm doing now as an adult.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
The different sides of it, and
Yeah.
you know, unfortunately, and it's one of those things too, because now there are a lot of white suburban kids listening to rap.
Yeah.
And those words are used. I mean, and not just that word, but other words that might be considered offensive to mainstream, right?
Yeah.
That are not necessarily, that are racially insensitive. And it's like it makes it that much more difficult. Like my kids, you know, the nice white suburban Jewish boys, right? They will listen to some of the rap songs that have that. And I have to explain to them, I don't want it to become normal to them, you know, normalize to them, but you know, there are going to be some kids that do say it with, and that's what I'm saying about being naive or ignorant. They're gonna be like, well, what's wrong? You know, what's wrong with that? I just heard in the song that I love, my favorite artist says that.
Right.
So that's a challenge. But I think the education does start at home.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm an only child. I grew up, as I said, in a suburban area with not a lot of diversity, just in general. And, you know, I guess I never, I don't like it when people say they don't see color. I think I know what they mean when they say that.
Yeah.
But I also feel like I know that if I'm speaking to an African-American person, that I know they're African-American. I'm not going to sit there and say I don't see color. But that's obviously not preventing me from having a friendship with that person, or, you know, that kind of thing. So my parents did do a good job of that. But I want to ask you kind of about where we're at today. And I now know why we're doing the show in 2 parts, because I'm doing a time check, because I know you have to get to a meeting soon, but I have a few more minutes of your time, and I'm not going to get to even everything that I had for part 1.
You're good.
But I want to ask you this question. You know, a friend and partner, and I'll probably have her on a future show, and you'll probably know who I'm referencing, but I don't want to say the name right now. African-American, and she grew up in the Deep South during segregation.
Yeah.
And saw a lot of different things that, you know, a young person, girl or boy, should not see. Experienced a lot of things that no child should ever experience. She told me that what she's seeing in society today is 100 times worse than what she experienced back then.
Yeah.
And that, when she said that to me, that horrified me that she said that. And I respect, and this is somebody who I respect, and, you know, if she's saying that, there's some credence to it, right? As you've grown up and as you've gone through, you know, your life, are we in a worse, in your opinion, this is your opinion, do you feel like we're in a much worse spot today than we were when you were growing up? Are we making any progress when it comes to race relations and diversity and accepting people?
Yeah.
Where are we at today? Is it as bad as some people might think that it is, or what's your view on that?
Yeah, and you know what? The answer, you know, I don't want it to sound like it's cliche, because it's Don's point of view. We for me as an African American male, and what I see and what I experience, it's worse. And I'm gonna tell you why. And not to get political, I just think so much on the current administration. And this is so weird because I had this conversation with my wife all the time. This is real deep. We used to hear when Obama was in office, he's inciting racism, and I was like, okay, am I stupid? Like, where do I see this at? Like, but then I figured out that his inciting racism was because he was Black, so he was offending people by just being Black. And some people don't really understand that. It was just like, well, he's a Black president, right? So they were saying that he was inciting racism, but he never did anything to incite it, right? And again, I didn't want it to be political, but like, with the current administration, like, and I'm talking about for like my kids, like my 11-year-old, you don't have to tell her, explain to her, and plus we don't educate that stuff at home. But she'll ask us, she's like, why from the top? Why is he so mean? Why are certain things so out in the open? And why? And she asks us, and she's 11. Why does it seem like other people are just openly racist more like within the past 3 or 4 years? So to answer your question, yes, like I've never seen it like this in my 47 years. Like never. Like before it was kind of, if people didn't like each other, you didn't know if they liked each other or not. They was just kind of like, I'll just walk past you. Right. If I really don't like, if a person doesn't like another person from a different country, you really wouldn't know about it. Like, either I would speak to you or I wouldn't. And then we left it at that. That was just how it is, right? Or whatever their upbringing is. But nowadays, I mean, I think because of social media and then what you see, it is so blatant and terrible and rude. People are just so mean to each other. It's terrible, like on a whole nother level. Like you're explaining, like a friend of yours from, if somebody grew up in the 60s or 70s, whereas, you either would probably just see signs, Black people can't go here, you can't sit here, you can't do that. Or again, they would just be quiet or they wouldn't say anything to you. Now it's just straight out and open. Like you will drive down the street, somebody will roll the window down, they'll just call you the N-word. Or, just different things will happen that are just so much blatant nowadays. It's terrible. And does it seem more divided? Yeah, it does. It just seems that it's just going down in just a terrible, terrible rat hole.
So let me ask you this, and this is great perspective, and this is your experience. Again, we want to make sure that anyone who's listening to the show, this is Don's experience. So he's telling us what he has experienced and what his thoughts are. And I actually hope that we get comments on the show. I hope people I hope people do email or write in on social media and let me let us know what you think. When you talk about the division that you're seeing and that you feel like you're experiencing, do you feel unsafe? Do you feel and we're going to go into this. I want to just, because we're starting to get a little bit to the end here. I want to ask you this question and one more, and then I want to get into media in the next show, location, and raising a family in this current environment. We're not going to cover that today, but that's on the next show.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you, Don, yourself, and we can go into your family the next time, your kids. When you wake up in the morning, because some things are more blatant now, do you feel unsafe as a Black man in America? And we're talking about somebody who lives in the DC area, which is, again, more diverse than a lot of other places, right?
Yeah.
Do you feel unsafe, or does it just more intimidated? Yeah. Or how do you feel when you wake up in the morning?
So this is interesting. So I haven't been, our studio's in Fairfax, right?
Right.
One of the reasons that I don't go to Fairfax anymore is because, of course, Fairfax is not that diverse. As things started getting worse in the news and media and just the things you would see in the protests, I feel safe in my community because my community is very affluent. African American neighborhood. And I can go for a jog. I don't have to worry. I can go for a walk. I don't have to get questioned. I can go to the store and I don't have to get looked at. I can walk down an aisle at the supermarket and I don't have to see heads turning behind me. I can drive without a cop pulling me over immediately just because I'm either driving a nice car or I'm just in the air. It doesn't happen as frequently because we're in an affluent and it's majority African American. I stopped going to Fairfax because for me personally, I just didn't want to get stopped by the cops. I felt I would tell, like, my son is just like probably like going crazy. And we'll talk about this deeper next time. And I'm just like, dude, you can't drive over into the Virginia area. And if you do, I need to be with you. And if you do get pulled over, that's a whole nother conversation. But I feel safe where I am, but I don't feel safe when I drive outside the area. And is it because, yeah, we do see things happening to a lot of African males on the internet and people that we know? Yeah, but these things are really occurring. And I have close friends that situations have really happened to. So I think for me, what I've done to protect myself and then my son from not experiencing that trauma, we've stopped certain things that we do. And it's crazy to say that, Don, you won't drive over to Fairfax, and I haven't in 6 months. Will I go back there? Maybe not, maybe once a week. But I've already told my partner, I was like, I probably won't be driving out here, and you see small little things start to escalate. Like the last time when I was there, this is a little bit before COVID, I got on the elevator and I get on the elevator. Everybody usually gets on the elevator. You have production clothes on, black pants, shirt, whatever, going up. And the guy's like, where are you going? And I was like, I'm looking at him like, I don't even know you, so why are you asking me where am I going? And I was like, I looked at him, I was like, to my studio. And I get off the elevator and I just happen to look back. He sticks his head out the elevator to see exactly where I'm going. And just back to the whole conversation about being offended, that offended me. And it does make me feel unsafe in different situations. And it doesn't help at all. Like, real talk, look what happened with the governor in Michigan. They seized those guys, and it doesn't help. And I'm not a big conspiracy person. I don't go online and listen to conspiracies. But even with the current election that's coming up, we're having conversations in the neighborhood, and they're like, hey, everybody feels safe around here. And we're just like, yeah, you guys have carry protection, you do whatever. And we just feel uncertain, like we don't know what will happen. Like, you just don't know. So those are our conversations that we're having in the area because, people are making threats, and it's not coming from our community,
right? Right.
So it's 50-50. It's really weird.
It's it's always tragic when you hear about stories, not being able to drive in a car. Mm-hmm. And we see all these things, and we'll talk about the media and sensationalism of media and whether it really is sensationalism or not. We'll talk about that on the next one. I know you can go on the internet and find a lot of footage on traffic stops, and we've had this discussion on the show. We try not to get too political on the show, but there are bad police out there, and there are amazing police that would be the first to come to your aid. Yeah. White police officers and black that would come to your aid too. So make sure there's that balance there. But it is scary that we live in that kind of society where, going down into it's even weird to have to say a white neighborhood, right? It's weird to have to say that. Yeah. That somebody having to, go for a jog and maybe somebody videoing you or even asking you where you're going.
Yeah.
I've always been on the mindset, if somebody looks suspicious, it doesn't really matter. I've seen suspicious people of various looks and creeds. And if they look suspicious, they look suspicious, white, black, and whatever. Yeah. Somebody's like peeking in your window. Yeah. That's a suspicion. But if somebody's jogging down the street and they're wearing it, although they have to wear a shirt, they have to wear a shirt. I told you that. I don't care who you are. You wear a shirt when you're jogging. You've seen that. That's my thing. Before we let you go here, and again, we're going to get into some maybe a little bit heavier topics on the next show. But before we let you go here, I want to ask you about diversity and the word diversity. And I guess diversity and inclusion, because, I'm in marketing. And when you're in marketing, You know, you always have to look for it. I try to make sure that it's when there's something that has to do with diversity, I try to make sure that it's genuine, that it's authentic, that it's not just token, that I'm not just doing it to look good. So if you have a picture with 4 people, let's make sure we have the Asian guy. Let's make sure we have the black guy in there. You know, you have to do that. But I always try to make sure that that's, at least somewhat authentic. But I guess diversity means different things to different people.
Right.
And some of my buddies and I were just talking recently, when you say diversity, you could be talking about men and women. You could be talking about 20-year-olds versus 50-year-olds.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody goes to the race thing when you talk about diversity. For you, Don, when the word diversity is used, how do you define, and I don't, it doesn't have to be a specific definition, but in general terms, how do you define diversity? Does it pop into your head as automatically race, or is it something else?
When I look at diversity, and when I hear the word diversity, I do think of multi-inclusion. You know what I mean? Like, I think of Asian, Black, white, Indian, Latino. Like, I think, when I think of that, I don't know why. Maybe it's just what's just been embedded in my head or what we're educated to believe or think. So sounds stupid, but my wife has like drawn me into watching Hallmark Christmas shows, right? And she like knows the behind, the beginning, and she's like, I'm so happy that they hired a diversity inclusion person, because now you see more diversity, Indian, Latino, Black, white in the show. She was like, what town that you go in is all white? Like, and I was like, I don't know. And she's, so we have this conversation a lot. She's like, we do live in a society now that it is more diverse, right? It's diverse to see. We live in America, so America has typically been diverse, right? Like, I don't like growing up, I've always seen in my classes at my little Catholic school, Asian, Latino, Black, white, everyone. So when I think of the term, that's what I see. And then when I don't see it, then I'm like, oh, is there a diversity issue?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I'm sure you've had a lot of conversations with your kids. I want to talk to you a little bit about that in the next show.
Yeah,
because I've spoken to my kids, and it's obvious there's a lot going on right now for kids of all backgrounds and all races, right? COVID and in and out of school and just everything, right?
Yeah.
But it really is interesting at its core, and and sometimes it takes kids to make adults see this. But my kids will ask me, like, I don't, in a slightly different topic. My son will ask me, I don't understand why somebody would hate a man for being in love with another man.
Right.
And everybody has their own views. I understand that, but it's so odd. If you just forget all, you peel the onion, right? It goes deeper and deeper and deeper, and sometimes it starts to sting the more you get into it, right? But if you really look at it on the surface, to hate, to have the hatred, and you're talking about dirty looks or people not picking up simply because of how you were born. I know it probably sounds cliche, but it's to me, it's a bizarre thing. I mean, what if somebody is what if there was a rainbow colored person, right? And they had the same views as you. They love the same football team that you loved. Why would you not like that person just because they are a rainbow color? It just, if you think about it on surface, it's so absurd.
Yeah, it's upbringing. It really is. It's just. I want to say one other point too, and I want to make sure I include and said that, because even looking at those Hallmark shows that we made our comment, we're the same way. Like, if we go to Atlanta, go to different places, we're like, man, it's hella Black in here. Like, there needs to be some diversity here. But even when we're working on projects, DC government is pretty much of African American, and the conversation is always, okay, if we're working on something, we need to make sure that it's diverse. Why? Because society is not that way anymore. Society is everyone. So why show a video that's all Black or all white or all whatever? You know what I'm saying? So it should be mixed. To me, it should be. Like, I don't know for other people, but I want to make sure that I said that, because we're like that on our side too. We're just like, well, we just can't have a video with just all Black people. As a matter of fact, we had a discussion the other night. We're just looking at all the interviews. We're like, okay, all right, okay, all right. And it just has to be that way, so.
Well, that's inclusion, right? I mean, inclusion and diversity. If you're missing a person, even if that person happens to be the majority of the population, that they're still missing, right?
Yeah. But not to cut you off, Brian, but not just because of color. It's because of opinions of diverse people. Exactly. Because, like, if you look at a panel that has Black, white, Latino, Asian, Indian, everyone, you will get a perspective from all backgrounds, not because, oh, I'm looking up there and I see all these different colored looking people. That's not the case. The case is if you bring a panel together, you want diverse cultures to talk about diverse things so they could give an opinion, because a one-track opinion from one culture, one minority or whomever, you're not going to get what you're looking for. So sometimes people get that twisted. It's not a color thing. It's just a culture. It's a culture thing.
Right, different viewpoints from different backgrounds.
Right.
And that's kind of what I was getting at before when I was talking about the marketing side of things. And when you're doing it, it's like, again, sometimes it might be a picture, right? So there's nobody talking, but I want it to really be authentic. Like if you're having a panel, I'm not just filling that seat because somebody looks different and we're checking the box. It's because they offer something from that Asian culture, from that Indian culture, from that Black culture, from that Caucasian culture, right? I want to let you go, but I just want to leave with, because this kind of leads us into the next part of our show. We talk about diversity, right? And I was working for an organization in DC. And because the next time I want to talk to you about how geography plays a role. Are things different in the suburbs and in the city here in Connecticut versus DC, right? So I was working for an organization in DC, and we were hiring someone for the marketing team. And there was, I think it was an African-American male, a Latina woman, obviously, and then and a white female. And they were all great candidates. And I remember having a conversation with the HR person. And when I say the story, you'll know why I'm not saying what the organization was. But and the HR person said to me, all things considered equal, if I were you, I would hire the white woman. And I want to be very clear that the HR person was not white. And I remember looking at me like, well, why wouldn't we just hire the person if the white person is the most qualified? That's fine, but why would we specifically pick the white woman? And the person said to me, remember, this is the white woman. We need more diversity in the office. And the funny thing about that, and that was because in DC at that particular organization, I was one of the only white people in that office. And this person said, we need more white people to make it more diverse. So I found that amusing, because in that, and in like Connecticut here, you would that's rarely, that would never be said, because it's not, most people in most offices happen to be white. But in this particular office setting, this person said, hire the white person for diversity, so we actually have more diversity. I thought that was ironic based on that, but I thought it was really interesting and telling that sometimes where you live and the demographic of where you live can sometimes have it can influence how you feel about certain people and certain looks and cultures and whatnot. Things in DC are probably different than they are in the farmlands of Indiana, right? I'm just saying. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. So the next show, Don, I want to talk to you about geography. Because you've lived in a few different places. You're in DC now. You're in West Virginia. Okay, so we'll talk about that. I want to talk about what you're telling your kids these days. How are you protecting your kids? How are you educating your kids? What are your kids seeing out there? And then I also want to talk about the media. And is the media perpetuating certain unfair stereotypes? Is the media helping the cause? And I want you to also think about if there's anything where you have felt, whether it's recent or in the past, where you have actually really felt not only offended, but actually discriminated against. So we're going to talk about that next time. Is there anything that I missed on today's show that I should add in before we let you go here? Because you've been awesome, and I'm looking forward to continuing this.
We could probably have a series of these conversations currently right now, just because of the state of the country. But, we probably don't have too much time, and plus people don't want to hear that conversation only and always and forever. But I look at it as just being education. And I think any time that you get an opportunity to have, two people from different backgrounds have a discussion, it's important, because you educate each other and you educate people. It's not so much that you want them to push your ideology on them. It's just understanding from where they're coming from and how they live. So I appreciate just the opportunity to voice my opinion on part one. I look forward to voicing more of my opinion in part two. And again, it's not speaking of all African Americans. It's just talking about how Don, the Haitian guy from Jersey that lives in DC now, what his experiences currently are and how I'm getting through them and how I'm living helping my family and being supportive to my family to help them to be safe.
Well, you've been great. I mean, I've learned a lot from you over the years in a number of different ways. And, for anybody, because you always have the naysayers and the negative people. And I hope that when people listen or watch the show and this one and part two, that they don't look at even at me and say, they'll be, well, he just wanted to have a black guy on so he could, and that's what I was saying. Like it's authentic. And I could, I could have found a random person, but you're somebody that I know, that I respect, that that has similar values to what I have. That's why I chose you, not because necessarily of the color of your skin, but because of the perspective that you bring. Yeah. So I hope that people have seen that. This is a genuine conversation. Mustny.com. Don, so Don always says that he likes the show. Don is forced to listen to the show every week. So based on how he edits this show, we'll know if he actually really liked it or not. if we get 10 minutes worth of the podcast this week, we'll know he didn't really like it that much. But
right.
But I'm looking forward to part two. Don, we're going to cover a few different things. I'll talk to you about the schedule for next week. Order your mask, Don. I'm sure you have plenty. But mustny.com, show sponsor. Let's give them some love. Chris and Monica Bosser, they're amazing. My dad has it now, COVID, so it can happen to anyone. Let's not be naive about that. And Don, you've been offered great perspective. Next week we'll offer some more. And in the meantime, let's keep an eye on each other. And also, as always, let's keep an eye on life.